Welcome to Draw Process, where I draw a comic book page and share my techniques and thoughts. Page 20 of episode 2 of my comic First Sun and Sword today. I was thinking about the way in which I became a comic book artist, the way in which I became serious about doing it. There was a point about 9 years ago when all my little drawings and little comic strips I drew since I was a little kid, teenager, even adult, little attempts at it, there was a point where I decided it's time to be serious and use the correct tools, really try to make a finished printed comic. And that was really the key element, that I wanted to print a comic book. That meant I needed to set it up digitally. I needed to likely ink it and get a nice quality and do it in the right size paper and stuff so that I could print it. That was the turning point, really, when I decided that I was going to make a book, a product, a printed thing for people. But really, everything before that was really important. It was really part of what got me, where I am now. And the further I get down this road of printing comic books, of really making them, 9 years now, the more I see that there's a real continuity of everything I was doing up to now. It didn't just start 9 years ago. It was everything before that. When I was about, maybe 26, I came up with a story, some characters, kind of a superhero universe. And I was penciling pages of the story in a sketchbook. I had some of a story done, and I needed to finish writing it. And the way that I told stories was visually, drawing out the pages, drawing out the scene. And there wasn't much of a focus on page composition. There was no inking or anything technical. It was just rough pencils, rough panel shapes, and just panel by panel telling the story. There was a little bit of effort into, establishing shot close up and so on. There was some effort into that, but nothing like what I do now. But I drew, I don't even know, maybe 10 pages of that, roughly, and maybe 20, I don't remember. But I was getting the story going, and then I lost interest in the story, and I dropped it. Now, one would think that it would be better to write out a perfect story and then start drawing it. That way you don't waste time drawing pages that you don't need. But I am such a comic book artist, such a visual storyteller, that's the way that I tell stories. When I know the story's working is when it works on paper, in visual format, in comic format. So, and that's where my interest is. So I was always doing that. And that was a lot of practice. That was a lot of practice at visual storytelling, even though maybe the panel composition focus wasn't so strong at the time. It was a lot of drawing that was for storytelling purposes. I wasn't just drawing to look cool or to just make illustrations. It was storytelling, close-ups, wide shots, backgrounds, even if they were rough, even in the goofy, almost stick figure ones I did sometimes for fun. Those, there was still backgrounds. There was still choices of camera angles and stuff, telling a story. And I always had a lot of fun doing it, and I would share it with just family, friends. And that was enough. I think I was lucky to kind of predate the internet to a degree, or just, at least at a time when everyone wasn't so embedded in social media and stuff. I was disconnected from anything comic book community, anything publishing and printing and comic making. I was just making comics because I loved it. Something that I hope people could still do today. It's just, I think it does get harder to do these days with just, it's hard to do something just for yourself and not be so aware of everyone else and what they're doing and what they would think and so on. Lots of time in that. Even in my undergrad working on student films, sometimes I did some storyboards, and I was just, it's how I thought, it's how I communicated. It was like really good storyboards to communicate the shot by shot, little story we were going to film. So when I think of it that way, everything mattered, and that rough and messy and naive way that I was doing it for years and years was not a waste. And what I was, without knowing it, was a comic book artist, a sequential storyteller. No one else knew it yet. I hadn't printed a book. I hadn't, taken it to that stage, that format. But that's what I was doing, and that's what I was developing skill in, and in some ways developing skill in more quickly than I might have if I had, moved into this format, this stage more quickly. If I started making comics seriously, trying to, make them neatly printed and published and everything, at 20 years old, I think I would have burned out. I would have been really frustrated with the challenge, the difficulty of drawing and executing the project. And doing that might have slowed me down, my development, because I would be too self-critical, too worried about the wrong things, investing in the wrong things. And yeah, maybe I got lucky, because it does seem like it was just a good time whenever I took on printing and publishing and doing it all the right way, quote unquote. That was seemed to come at just the right time when I was ready for it. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that's encouraging to some people out there to consider that you can make comics without making comics officially. You don't have to announce to the world you're doing it. You don't have to take on that sort of identity. You don't have to print them or anything. Just tell your stories and keep doing it. And even if you just show family or something, that's fine. You're on the journey. And who knows where I would have gotten off the train. There were quite a few detours in music. Was the big one where I focused on music and guitar a lot more than art for a while. And the drawing and storyboarding could have easily landed me like in film, and then I would have been focused on filmmaking and not continued to develop my visual and sequential storytelling, at least in a comic book format. I could have gotten off at any other stop on the train, but kept going and ended up here. And it would have been okay to get off somewhere else. Making films, using this way of thinking, of being a sequential storyteller and using it in some other medium, would have been fine. It would have been great, and I would have been good at it. And I just happened to use it here, in comics specifically or directly, which in a way is one, you could think of that as a failure. It's like every other stop before this one would have meant that you were like successful enough at something else to distract you from doing this. But I would think that there are, there's plenty of filmmakers that could have been really good comic artists if they focused on it, but they never developed too far in this skill set. They transitioned into film, so or game design or whatever it is. So, yeah, those activities seem to be helpful in getting where you're trying to go, even if they, even if you question that, even if there's pressure to go all in as an indie comic maker right away. You don't have to. So I was thinking about that. It was just interesting that to realize the continuity between my earlier scribbles and stories and then when I finally took it seriously. Or as I don't even like putting it that way. It sounds like the other stuff wasn't worthwhile. When I finally went into the medium fully, or committed fully to the medium. Mm-hmm. So now I continue to learn how to make better lines, better illustrations, better anatomy and figures and folds in fabric and rooms and textures and panel compositions. There's all these skills that I slowly improve at now, and those are nice. Those help, but what's behind all of it is a perspective. Being a person who has a perspective, something to say. And that doesn't mean a particular story you want to tell. It doesn't have to be like a personally important story you're going to tell. But you have a perspective. You have a way of looking at the world that you communicate through your drawings. The rest can be learned for most people. You can continue to learn the other things, but it would be a mistake to abandon my perspective to try to draw like other people, to master the style, the inking style, and so on. Not that I can't learn it, but to do that and abandon having your own perspective would not be wise. Because the perspective is the important thing. It just needs to be dressed up in a way that people can find palatable. And so I continue to develop these skills that'll help it be more refined, more palatable, more clean and clear. And along the way, my storytelling improves too. I have to improve, in my panel composition and things like that too. And in the stories themselves. The more stories I tell, the better I get at telling them. The drawing the word balloons in the panel has really been good for me lately. Because starting right from the thumbnail, and again, I don't thumbnail anymore. I just start drawing right on the page. But I start roughly, and that's my thumbnail. But from that rough on, I'm planning the position of word balloons to flow with the art and to not cover up anything too important. And that's why we have this shape here. We have the eye is going to be going from left to right at the top here. And then the word balloon there is in the center pretty much. And then you have him in the middle, the very middle of the panel. and then another word balloon beneath him. It's like balloon, his head, and then balloon, the second balloon, just 1, 2, 3. And if I hadn't drawn them on the page, I mean, I used to try to plan where they would go, but not fully draw them on the page. And even then, it just wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as really drawing them, Planning them's good, but really putting them on the page means I really know that's, I'm really planning it. I'm really executing that plan in one go when the art's being done. You'll see that the pencils are pretty rough. I'm trying to get looser and looser with the pencils and trust my inks, because the way I used to ink was a little more like, even though it wasn't tracing, it was because I would still have rough pencils, but when I used the micron pen, it was a little bit more like tracing, because I would choose the outline, and then I would choose the spot of the shadow. This is building the drawing like you would with a pencil, because I can make a line and then add a little more to it, add a little more, change it a bit. By doing that, I'm building the drawing, which means I'm drawing again. So I have the pencils phase that's drawing, and then the inking phase that's also drawing. It's not tracing. That will allow me to have rougher pencils because I get one more attempt at them in the inking phase. And it will allow me to have more refined, finished product, because I'm getting to refine it more in that phase. So this is helping with me it's helping me leave it more rough and do less planning in the pencils and stuff. I'm trying to keep in mind, I like my heavy blacks style. I like my simplified style. And I'm trying to just remember that and keep that in mind, that I still throw in some shadows and use shadows to guide the eye and stuff that I used to do. But there is a little less of it happening. And in a sense, the shadows are getting a little more realistic. There's more like secondary lighting on figures. I don't just cast half of his face in shadow because it would look cool. It's a little more realistic. Yeah, and you can see that in my work, from earlier work to now. There's a comfort in conveying anything. Lots of figures in the background and whatnot. I did this, what was it called? Wee Willie Winky. It was one of the folk tales I did in black and white. It was the first one I did technically, but it ended up in a collection. And you can read it on my website or on the Clever Kaiju website. But that was rather meticulously, not like fully meticulously, but rather meticulously planned out comic, panel by panel, carefully constructed. And that's the opposite of what this is. This is, I've got a room, I have these figures in it, there's, background elements that I want to show. I'm not just going to have them disappear or be out of the shot, they're all here. And that lends itself to this little bit more cartoony style with a little bit more realistic shadows and lighting. And as far as reader experience, from what I can tell, it's always hard to tell as the author what the reader experience is. But to me, it is probably a better reader experience. Someone might really appreciate the style of some of the older stuff I did and enjoy it more. But I think for most people, this is more enjoyable of a reading experience. You're a little more engaged in the flow of the panels, in the acting, the expressiveness, and the world is a little more fleshed out. So I think it's the right move in general. And yeah, and then I just keep going, right? I'm getting better without focusing on it primarily. I'm still getting better, bit by bit. So as I continue to work on my, just expressing myself through this medium, and I continue to also get better, to tell stories, to not shy away from showing everything that should be shown for the story's sake. Then I'll just let the style develop. The style will come to be naturally, and the polish, the seasoned, more veteran look that I would want will come by actually being a seasoned veteran, and not by great effort at controlling it. So on I go. I've even had the thought, I think today, I was thinking maybe I should get more focused drawing by a certain model, say Loomis method for heads, by drawing clear puppets, basic cylinders and boxes of figures. And if I get better at just that underlying structure, and I just kind of position all these boxes and cylinders in the shot, and then it'll be easier to draw figures on them, and they'll be consistent. And it'll read easily. Everyone will know, oh, that's a figure because it's the same shape he always uses. The problem with that, as soon as I have the thought, I don't, I question it. I know that it may not be best. That when I scribble my way to the form, to the figures, I'm finding their motion, their movement, their uniqueness, and it's allowing for a much broader vocabulary, a much broader expression of ideas and characters and expressions on their faces and so on. And so I don't want to lose that just by getting more structured for simplicity's sake, for consistency's sake, for speed. Some structure obviously is okay, but yeah, I don't want to go too far that direction. I want to stick with this storytelling approach to the drawing. I just keep doing it that way. And here is the finished page. It's like he's waiting for the servant to close the doors so that he knows he has privacy. And then he talks to the men. And he explains the plan, what's going to happen next, what foreboding danger lies in store for our heroes. And I give him a kind of a more villainous look. It's like he shows his true colors when he's alone. So that's fun. And that is it. I'll keep doing my best to be honest and share my practice of my art, and I hope you do the same. See you next week.